Good morning everyone. When we had our last club meeting and Mike and I ran that workshop looking at shooting those still life subjects, I very quickly went through my basic process for post-production of an image in Lightroom. It was suggested to me after the meeting it would be quite good if I could capture that process for sharing with you all. So, in the spirit of our virtual club, I thought I'd have a go at doing a video. This will either be a complete disaster or not quite a complete disaster. So anyway, I've managed to find a little bit of software that I had on my computer to record the screen. I've got a very basic microphone, so apologies for the poor audio, but I'll give it a go, and if it's worth sharing I'll share it with you. Otherwise you won't see this at all. Okay, so this is the image that I took at Mapperton when we went there last year for the workshop, and this little flower here is an Erigeron daisy. I quite like the way that the dew was collecting on the petals, and I tried to capture it with my macro lens. Unfortunately it wasn't very well illuminated. The sun wasn't in the right place. I don't think there actually was much sun on that day, but anyway, here's the image, and so what I'm going to do is just go through the basic steps in about 5 minutes that I would apply to this image, and it's my standard workflow as a starting point before I dive off into perhaps Photoshop if there's some special work to do. So the first thing I would do is have a look at the histogram, and you can see here, top right up here in the histogram, that the image is the histogram is very much biased over to the left, which means that I must have underexposed the image. That was probably conscious on my part, because there's a danger with white petals that you can easily get them overexposed, so I offset the exposure to avoid the chance of blowing out the highlights on the petals. So the way that I would correct this image, first thing to do is I always apply the lens correction profile to avoid any or to eliminate the distortion on the lens. So if you come down to lens correction panel, you see I put the tick in the box and it automatically picks up, knows the lens that I had that's from the data that's buried in the raw file. Then the next step is to try and increase the whites in the image to brighten it up a bit. So coming down to the basic adjustment panel, you've got the white slider here, which you can, as you can see, you can boost the whites and you can really overdo it. I've got two ways that I would normally use this control. In fact, this applies to several of these controls. The first one is if you hold down the Alt key when you grab the white slider, then you see the screen's gone black, and that's a clipping mask that's been created. And as you slide the whites control over to the right, if I go too far, you can see that that's showing that the highlights are going to be blown out. So the trick is to slide it back until you don't get any white or blue spots appearing on the screen. So that looks about right there. You can do the same for the blacks control, again holding down the Alt key, grab the black slider, and then you can, if you go too far, you're going to get black clipping, shadow clipping. So drag it back again. Probably with blacks it's less critical than the white, so a little bit remaining is not going to be a real issue. Release the Alt key. You can see already it's starting to look a bit brighter, the image. The next one I would go with is the highlights, and this one again holding down the Alt key, grab the slider. If you go too far to the right, you can just see some blue spots coming through which indicate some highlight clipping, so bringing it back down till those disappear. And finally, in the basic adjustment panel, the shadows, I tend to do this one without the clipping mask, but you can either boost or darken the shadows. For this particular image I think it works well to darken the shadows a bit. So that's the basic adjustments of the white points, black points, shadows and highlights. What I would then do is come down to the tone curve, and I quite often apply what is called an S-curve to it to increase the contrast, and there's two ways you can do that. The way I normally do it is I grab the light slider and give that a slight right shift to boost the light elements in the image, and then correspondingly drag the dark one down, and that's, you can see it's darkening the background down. And I might even drag the shadow slider and take that one down even more, and you can see that the tone curve has taken on this S shape. There is another way you can do this. If you come down to the point curve part of the panel and click on the where it says linear, in my case you've got two examples of a medium contrast, and that's applied an even stronger curve, or you could go strong contrast and that's exaggerated even more. I don't particularly like the strong contrast in this case, so what I'm going to do is go back to the way I had it originally, and if you look over on the history panel, I just need to click back on 3 steps previously where I applied the tone curve manually by making these changes. Having done that, I then come back up to the basic panel again, and the presence area. I quite often apply just a touch of clarity to the image. If you zoom in on the image, I just clicked on it to bring it up to 1:1 pixels. You can see better the effect that the clarity slider is having. It's very easy to overdo it and it can spoil the image. The other one that I quite often use is a little bit of vibrance, just not very much, just slightly, and go back to normal size. And that's probably not far off the way the final edit would be. I'd probably now, because of this particular shape of image, I'd probably clip it with the cropping tool, get rid of some of this dark area to the right, and maybe I might even consider going for a 1:1 crop on this one. Deciding where best you want to put the crop tool. I still think that there's some distraction in the background on this image, so I'm going to use the radial filter now and drag it to get the shape that you want. Probably make it just slightly bigger. With the radial tool, you can either have it in normal mode, which I've got here. If I drag down the exposure, so it's darkening everything outside of the tool. Might drag it down just a little bit, get rid of some of the background. Let's just go down a fraction more. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put a new radial filter on in a similar sort of place. Just get the size, place it over the flower. This time I'm going to go to invert. What this means is any changes you make now are applying within the circle rather than the outside of the circle. So I think what I'm going to try here is just slightly increasing the whites a bit and a little bit more clarity, and perhaps a little bit contrast. You can see if you go too far on the highlights, then you lose the effect. And that's probably okay for that. These elements down in the bottom left are distracting bits, so I'm going to go and reposition the crop. Just come up a bit, get rid of those. And so those are the basic adjustments that I would apply. I had the camera set on auto white balance, so I don't very often change the white balance, but if you wanted to make an adjustment, you could pick up the eyedropper here then find somewhere in the image that's a neutral grey. So this looks pretty good. So, and you just click on it. And do I think that's an improvement? Possibly. It's made this more natural grey looking, and it's brought out a little bit of colour in the petals. So yes, I'm going to stick with that. Then when you finished, you redock the eyedropper back in there. You can, if you wanted to, perhaps bring out some of the yellows in there. If you come down to the HSL area, using this area, you can click on this tool here, drag it over to a colour that you wish to. I want to boost the yellows a bit. So when you're in the yellow area, hold down the left mouse key and just drag, and you can see the sliders going up and down, and that's boosting the yellows or taking the yellows down. Let's go back, just give it a slight boost, and then dock the tool back in, and I'm going to say that's done. No, final thing, the camera doesn't apply any sharpening, so I always tend to add a little bit of sharpening. You don't want to do too much because you could spoil the image, but generally I don't go any more than about 70 or 80 on the sharpening. This particular image is not too noisy, so I don't need to worry about the noise reduction. I might just put a bit of vignetting on it, so post-crop vignetting, slide to the left and it will tend to darken the corners a bit. I think that gives a slightly better effect on this image. And that really is the end of the processing for that image. So to see the effect of what we've done, if you come down to the bottom of the image here where it's got YY, if you click on that, you'll see the original image on the left and the processed image on the right. I think it has made quite a difference to the image. It's easy to overdo things. I would say when you're making these changes, make subtle changes, and even perhaps if you get to the point where you think that looks right, I would even tend to nudge back just a little bit so that you make sure you don't overdo it. Okay, I hope that's been of use to some of you. So maybe there'll be another image, another video if people would like some more advice on Lightroom or Photoshop or other aspects of post-production. Let me know what you think and we'll take it from there. So stay safe everyone, and I hope this has been of use to you. Bye for now.